This is going to be a, a little bit of an addendum to the last one, talking about how to love yourself on the path. And it's a practice. It's funny how you kind of reinvent the wheel as you go along the path, just intuitively. Certain practices come forward, or certain maybe pointings or teachings or advice or bits of wisdom, or even just tiny little fragments that were kind of irrelevant at one point. Kind of you start to connect the dots between different modalities, and it's kind of, I'm thinking about like with IFS, and they talk a lot about healing the exiles. It's like you start to see the nuggets, the kernels of truth, what's useful in different traditions, different paths, and you can kind of just spontaneously, seemingly, sometimes come across certain practices and then realize, oh, that's similar to, what so-and-so psychologist was talking about, or this spiritual figure was talking about, or I can see how that would make sense. I don't know if I explained that very well, but one of those for me is I started having, and I guess some people, again, Craig and probably some other people I've heard kind of suggest versions of this to me. But it's like if you can find, and this has to do with self-love again, and kind of a different approach. It's like talking from a different angle. Can you find that inner innocence? Can you find that inner sweetness? And that's really difficult for some of us. I definitely struggled with that, I still struggle with that to some extent. But one thing that helped is I remembered seeing a video of me as a baby. It's gonna bring me to tears thinking about it, but and I won't get into all the specifics. That'll be hard to talk about, but and just seeing the kind of fragility and vulnerability and sweetness of a baby, and it can be really hard to connect those words and those feelings to oneself for whatever reason, personal trauma and what is that word, introjected, or just self-hate and all the kind of inner division that we carry. But at some point, it wasn't right away, but at some point after I'd been doing some healing, just having that image come to mind, seeing, sorry, I need to pause. Seeing that vulnerability, just a little baby, of a little child, and that innocence, it kind of helped to reconnect to that and to see myself in a slightly different light, opened up a little bit more compassion towards myself. And I'm just using that as a personal example, but hopefully you can see how that is applicable. Of like, if you can find a memory, or you can connect to like a photo of you when you were young, and I imagine for some people it's easier than it is for others of us. Some people it's easier than it is for others to find that innocence. And this isn't like an absolutely necessary practice or something, but can be helpful in the healing process, just a tool or just an approach. I don't really like that word, tool. in this case, but it can just help to open up a dimension of compassion. So maybe it's a baby photo or a photo when you're young, maybe just a specific memory of a really kind of pure, sweet time in your life, or video. And why I brought up the part in the beginning is because as this was going on, I started to think, oh, you hear people talk about, what is it? Reparenting or healing the inner child, that kind of a thing. And I don't know who the theoreticians or the particular healers or psychologists or whatever school of thought, I don't know who are those initial, the people who kind of formulated that and maybe formalized that. Yeah, I haven't at all explored what that actually means, so I could be way off. Could be, I'm guessing it's maybe refers to a very specific set of practices or school of psychology or something, but I could start to see how that could be really useful. And that is part of what you're doing, irregardless of what that healing the inner child, if that has a specific meaning, irregardless, just that phrase, that is part of what we're doing. It's like we're going back in time to these places that are still unfinished. It's like we have these fragments almost of ourself. It's like if it's loneliness, we might have this experience of going back in time to that place where we were really lonely and re-experiencing it. And it's almost like you're rescuing that part of yourself. You're going back and you're allowing it to express. You're allowing that loneliness to come forward and to heal and to feel safe and to dissolve, to reintegrate. So you are healing these inner, and not just child, but all throughout our lives. But a lot of this confusion and pain is sort of could say stuck or frozen or trapped. I don't know, those all seem a little bit too dramatic, but a lot of these experiences happen in childhood, early childhood, through, adolescence. So it's about going back into those, accompanying, in one sense, those lonely aspects of ourself, and they start to unwind. Yeah, or shame, feeling parts where we felt shame and kind of going back. And that can be a challenging one too, but can be really helpful if you have this innocent image to kind of almost triangulate, like to figure out the coordinates emotionally. It's like, yeah, I felt all this shame, like, man, I can never be forgiven. I've done this awful thing. I'm such a bad person. But then you have this recognition of your innocence, and that's kind of primary, that's fundamental, and that the conditions of your life distort that, and that we're not always surrounded by the most supportive people or the most emotionally intelligent people or the safest environments. So we end up doing, things that we regret. But part of the healing path is just recognizing, on one level you were doing the best that you could with the resources that you had, and that you are this innocent child of God, thrown into the lion's den, this world, thrown into the chaos and confusion and madness of this collective consciousness of this world. Yeah, and it's almost like have this fundamental innocence and you have this slightly more adult, hopefully slightly more adult version of yourself, and you kind of, I don't know if triangulate is quite the word, but it's like light coming from that direction and strength and light coming from this direction, and you can kind of meet those ashamed parts or those lonely parts and bring some light and and it can help to transmute those stuck places. It's not really the best way to explain it. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can just see that, the innocence that you are, that remains, that part of you still alive, has never left. It's been covered over, and you start to even see like the wounded parts, the things that you regret, the shameful things, painful things in your past, places where you're still kind of internally locked up. That innocence starts to come forward, and you start to see that those were, in a sense, strategies, like the behaviors, the things that you did were wrong. It's like those were strategies to help deal with an overwhelming situation. Not the best strategies, ideally, but they were ways of surviving, you could say, moving through difficulty. May have just been the only examples you had in your world from adults, from other people, of how to react. And that understanding, seeing kind of the logic behind it, or understanding why we act out in bad ways, or it can help to soften the shame and let some of the light shine through. Anyways, I really don't feel like I got it right. Not right, but really don't feel like I expressed it quite right in this video. Hopefully there was something in there. Take care.